They also had a program where their employees during the pandemic, they converted their tip jar to donations to the local food bank. And this was the employees' idea. They wanted to do this. And it was very generous because they could have used this money. I mean, they don't make a ton of money at this food store. And the owners loved this idea so much, they match it every week, and they've been doing it now for over a year and a half, and they've raised as much money for like 40,000 meals. And that's not really a workplace issue, right? But that's the owners showing that the priorities of their workforce are also their priorities, right? And that's recognizing them as whole people. So there's just so many different ways that we could do this. And so I'm not smart enough to tell you or your listeners how to make this work in your workplace. But maybe I can provide a lot of ideas and starting places for you to think through your situation and your employee needs and develop a solution that works for you.
Folks, I'm really excited about our show today. We have got Dr. Scott Behson, and he's actually going to be talking about his book. It just came out, The Whole Person Workplace. And what I love about our conversation is we really talk about, first of all, what does it mean to have a whole person workplace? And then second of all, more importantly, as employers or as managers, what can we be doing to really honor those life and work-life elements of our employees, the folks that we work with? What can we be doing to share more care, compassion, and consideration for each of them, no matter what season of life they're in or context in which they work? And so I think this idea of really being sensitive to that and finding ways to support employees as we're all been undergoing stress is so powerful. So really listen to Scott's points. He gives so many great examples and stories. And if you get a chance to buy a copy of his book, The Whole Person Workplace, I highly encourage it. So I hope you enjoy the conversation.
The Workplace Therapist Show is sponsored by the Leadership Foundry. Bringing a cutting-edge, real-world approach to leadership development, the Leadership Foundry partners with each client organization to create a custom-tailored experience, virtual or in person, that combines innovative leadership content, world-class facilitators, and one-on-one coaching to ensure your leaders have everything they need to grow and thrive. To find out more and to design your one-of-a-kind program, visit myleadershipfoundry.com.
Scott, I am really excited about having you on the show today, really excited about our conversation today. I'm really excited about your book, frankly, and I think it's such a great piece of content and topic that all of us need right now and couldn't be more timely than it is right this very moment. So before we kind of jump into kind of this idea of the whole person workplace, how we can create that dynamic or those structures or even those relationships, just for my listeners, tell us a little bit about you and your background, kind of what was been kind of your professional journey and what really inspired you to write this book?
All right. Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So my journey, I am a business school professor, and I've been doing research and scholarship and consulting and teaching in things like human resources and organizational behavior, and focusing on things like workplace flexibility and work-family issues for a very long time. And about 10, 12 years ago, I had what I call my mid-career crisis, where I just was frustrated as an academic that you write something and they wait 2 years for it to come out, and then 50 other academics read it and it doesn't really have very much impact. And so I started thinking well, who are the audiences that really need good information about work-life challenges and how we can rise to them? And so my journey started with doing some writing and outreach and public-facing work to working parents, and specifically to working fathers. And that culminated in my 2016 book called The Working Dad's Survival Guide, which is advice and encouragement for fathers trying to balance work and family. And after that, I was thinking, well, who else needs good information about work-life balance and rising to the challenge? And I said, employers, managers, HR types, organizational leaders. And so then I kind of shifted my focus, and that's led up to a culmination of this book, which I am so incredibly proud of, The Whole Person Workplace, Building Better Workplaces Through Work-Life Wellness and Employee Support. So that's kind of my professional journey.
Yeah, I love it. That's so exciting and a very kindred spirit, frankly.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this book. So let's start first. When you think about the title, The Whole Person Workplace. When you think about that, let's start by defining that. What really makes a whole person workplace, from your perspective?
Right. So the title actually comes from a quote from someone I interviewed for the book, and the quote is so beautiful. So let me just give you the quote. We have to recognize we get the whole person through the door. We get their hands and their backs and their hearts and their minds, and they're at all different places in their lives. And we have to do our very best to take care of them. And that just spoke to me so much. And it really talks about, you can value your employees as whole people with lives, priorities, challenges, stressors, passions outside of work. Or like most employers, we can focus and be like, yeah, we value our employees like as an asset, and we want to make sure they're okay enough to work for us, and focus just on their work time or the time they're working for us. Or we can expand our level of responsibility and care for our employees by valuing them as whole people. And if we do that, then we start taking it upon ourselves to say, well, if our employees are not mentally or physically well outside of work, they're not going to be able to bring themselves to work and be fully engaged and fully focused when they're there.
Right.
If they're stressed about childcare or elder care or a lack of money or, lack of developmental opportunities or whatever might be causing them stress in their lives, they can't step up for us. So by valuing our employees as whole people, one, we're like doing the right thing. And secondly, we're building a powerful culture where people want to be, and they wind up, being engaged and focused, stepping up for each other, stepping up for your customers and clients. And it's kind of a win-win for everybody, but it's more complicated. You're taking on more responsibilities and you're making values-based choices that aren't always easy.
Yeah, I love that definition. So I want to go back to the quote you gave me. I didn't write it all down, so I'm going to butcher the end of it. But it had something really important. It was something about, I don't know, the word in my mind I translate to the particular season that they're in their life.
Yeah.
Right, which could be, like I've got my dad's 87. Like at any point, I've already had this happen this summer. Drop everything. He got to go to the hospital. We've got those kinds of things that come up, and I've also got teenagers in the house. So we've got kind of those dueling sides.
We have very parallel lives, my friend.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So you've got some of those demands and the chaos that teenagers create. But then you can also think about folks that are maybe, in the middle of dating and they've got those relationship challenges, or they're dealing with some mental health challenges, or so many different seasons. So I mention this because if I put on my employer hat for a moment, that's a lot of different seasons. How do we think about caring for all of those? Is there a first place we need to start, or how do you do that?
Right. Well, I think it starts almost like how you build an organizational culture, right, around a set of values. And in this case, I lay out what whole person workplace values are. And then it's consistent decision-making around it. And it's a very inclusive approach. So, for example, a lot of people think when they hear whole person workplace and work-life balance and things like that, they think about working parents, right? And that's the easiest thing to think about, parental leave or childcare supports, right? But that's just like one set of your employees, right? If we're only focused on them, it's going to breed resentment, right? And other things. Listen, I deal with college students all the time. Many of them, 2 years out of college, feel suffocated by their student loans. They don't have families yet, right? Things like that. They're at a different stage in their lives, a different season. And then there's other people who have other challenges. And so the orientation is, how do I value my employees as whole people? And yes, it's difficult when you're in a large organization. You can't necessarily customize everything to every individual, but you can listen. You can offer a very wide range of supports and benefits so that everybody feels like there's a place where they can plug into support from the employer. One of my favorite visuals of a very broad benefits program is at BASF, the chemical company.
Yeah.
They have what it's visualized on their website as a periodic table of benefits. So it looks like the periodic table. And you can click on each box, and they're all in different categories. And it makes it pretty clear, I think, to employees or potential employees that there's lots of different supports that, depending on where you are in your life, you might be able to plug into, whether that's your professional development or going back and getting a degree, whether that's then childcare or elder care, whether it's wellness programs, whether it's just time for life and flexible work, whatever it may be. They kind of lay it out in this very comprehensive sense. So I think large companies really should seek to cast as wide a net as possible, starting with listening to employees through all the formal ways you can. At smaller organizations, you can really get to know your people, and very customized and create custom fit solutions. And managers and leaders, if you're a director and maybe there's 50 or 60 people in your organization, you should be able to know most of them. And then maybe we can be empathetic and create kind of ad hoc or informal solutions where they make sense too. There's no one solution. So that's the point of the book, really, is it starts with, here's the philosophy, here's the culture, here's the whole person workplace values. And then the rest of the book really talks about, here are lots of different ways you could get started in terms of parental leave or childcare or supports for new parents or supports for other people or wellness programs or compensation, benefits, performance management, hiring and onboarding, diversity and inclusion, where you might be able to get started, because I profile about 50 different companies, from the giants who stride the world to literally a food store with 12 employees in the White Mountains of New Hampshire and everything in between. Because I really wanted to be comprehensive, to show that you can be supportive of your employees on any budget and in different ways, right? So the small food store in New Hampshire, they let people know their schedules 3 weeks in advance.
Yeah, that's
right.
great.
I mean, that's really helpful for employees who have lives outside of work and need to schedule doctor's appointments and things like that, right? And not many hourly part-time employer places do that, right? And that doesn't really cost you anything, right? That costs you maybe a little bit more complicated when it comes to scheduling, right? They also had a program where their employees, during the pandemic, they converted their tip jar to donations to the local food bank. And this was the employees' idea. They wanted to do this. And it was very generous, because they could have used this money. I mean, they don't make a ton of money at this food store. And the owners loved this idea so much, they match it every week. And they've been doing it now for over a year and a half. And they've raised as much money for like 40,000 meals. And that's not really a workplace issue, right? But that's the owners showing that the priorities of their workforce are also their priorities, right? And that's recognizing them as whole people. So there's just so many different ways that we could do this. And so I'm not smart enough to tell you or your listeners how to make this work in your workplace. But maybe I can provide a lot of ideas and starting places for you to think through your situation and your employee needs and develop a solution that works for you.
Well, when I hear you tell that story, well, first of all, a lot of things came to mind. But even that story about that 12-person store, what I love about that was I actually wrote down three words that begin with the letter C.
Okay.
It was like care, compassion, and consideration.
Yeah.
And it was like, because the employer operated that way, then the employees wanted to operate that way with their community and the people they were serving. So it was nice, very elegant and beautiful. It kind of flowed all the way down. And
I think a lot of this it's almost bottom up, top down in many ways. Or maybe, in large organizations might start with HR thinking this would be a great initiative to have. But you need buy-in from leadership. You also need buy-in from people, right?
Yeah.
And so culture change is complicated, right? And deals with, all these different kinds of relationships. Yeah, I think you're right that, but when you signal that you care, right, you breed a culture of care. And I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think that's great. Another image that came to mind, so I'm kind of industry agnostic. I work with, big companies, small companies, nonprofits, universities, religious institutions. Particularly in the religious institution space, it's fascinating, whether you're talking about churches or synagogues or temples or whatever happens to be, because they tend to have a band of age of the congregants. Like
Okay.
everybody's like, 65 to 85. Everybody's like 20 to 35. And it's pretty easy to serve that population because if they're 20 to 35, they're all young singles or young married. If they're 65 to 85, they're in that season of life. What becomes really tricky is when you get those churches that have like 5-year-old to 95-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That becomes really challenging because you need to have daycare, you need to have special kind of community building activities for retirees, and all different kinds of things. But it's all about having that intentionality around trying to serve those different populations.
That's a great parallel. And in a religious or social services organization, what you're trying to do is create, programming for your different, constituencies, for your different, the people that you serve.
Yeah.
And, taking that metaphor to your employees, I think is really important. And, one of the things I love when I talk to or work with organizations that have values, on, if they're a healthcare organization or a religious organization or social services, they're very focused on these values, which is fantastic. They sometimes forget to extend this values-based approach to the people who work for them. And, so I find that
you're being very gentle when you say sometimes.
Well, no, I mean, all workplaces have their things. But
I would say in the nonprofit world in particular, there is a little more of a self-sacrifice mentality.
Sure.
And the burnout factor, from my experience, seems to be even a lot higher. So,
yeah, absolutely. I probably shouldn't say the organization, but this national organization that serves mostly teenagers, I spoke with them not long ago, and, in addition to trying to keep their workers and their clients physically safe and trying to serve them through the pandemic, they did a great job there. And I think that they, maybe why I was talking to them, why they called me, was, how do we kind of get back to the kind of workforce we want to be because of the disruption that they felt over the last year and a half.
Yeah. And I think to this direction we're taking it, you also have to educate employees to know where to get the services and how to plug in and be okay doing that. Sometimes in those nonprofit settings, people feel guilty about care for themselves or using resources that could be used to serve further the mission that they're a part of.
Sure, absolutely. And, also that's an implication for managers. I mean, again, if we want to get a little broader here, many companies have very well-developed HR programs and policies on lots of issues. And many rank and file employees don't really know these. Your managers and directors really should know these pretty well, number one, and should be able to call somebody else up at HR and get an explanation to their employee, right? They should be able to introduce the benefit or the program that they might be eligible for. I mean, right? The employee might not know that our employee assistance program has help with the Medicare paperwork for hospice care for your parents.
Yeah.
Some employers have that as part of their EAP, right? But an employee might not know that.
Yeah.
They're probably not going to ask HR about it because they didn't even think of it. But the manager, who should know that they're dealing with this elder care issue, should be able to say, hey, did you know about this? And let me call this person in HR and have them come down here and explain it to you. Yeah. That's an important part of, I think, managers and leaders in an organization really, making it real as opposed to just policies that are on the books, right? And making it the policies that are used and valued.
So you were already going down the path I wanted to go down. So we talked a lot already about macro. What can the organization do? What can the employer do? What are systems and structures and benefits? And I wanted to now take it micro. What can that manager, what can she or he do? What are kind of conversations they could be having? What are ways they could create even in a micro way in their own team and department, kind of a whole person kind of unit?
Yeah, well, one of the, again, most of the interviews and all the work I did on this book happened during the pandemic, right? I actually ripped up much of my first draft in March of 2020, and then had to redo all my interviews and talk to managers and leaders and everything during the pandemic. And so maybe a good example is this one organization, Flex Jobs, which has always been a remote-only work environment. So like they've never been co-located. They work all over. They developed these, they had already developed good systems for collaboration and for performance management and things like that, which are really important when you're working remotely. But they implemented a 15-minute, like a form that every employee fills out and the manager's filling out on about the employee, and they have a 15-minute conversation every week. And they did this all through the pandemic about like, how are things going? And I understand some people might not want to share all their personal stuff, so you need to be respectful of that. But they built it in that their weekly talks with the manager and members of the team wasn't just about the work. It was about what has been hard for you this week. What has been helpful for you this week. What can we do to make your next week better? And so that's like active listening and caring. And I think that's kind of the base thing that managers really could do. I think also, managers need to be creative. That it's not just maybe a formal program. Maybe sometimes we think about something outside the box that works for this employee. I have a good friend who works at one of the big four kind of global financial firms. And back when his kids were little, he was burning out, and he went to his boss and he's like, "Hey, can you help me here?" And they figured out daddy-daughter Wednesdays, where on Wednesdays he didn't come in till like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and he just had the mornings with his daughters when they were young. And that was just an informal little thing. And he's still there 20 years later in a leadership position, and he might not have been, right, if his manager didn't like just do this little customized thing that was against the culture, right? He was in one of those big hour work first kind of culture places. So it was brave of him and his manager, I think, to develop this small but really really important for him, this little program that helped him feel like a better dad. And the fact that he could feel like a better dad and still work there meant that he still works there, and like, I'm sure he's returned any productivity loss that there might have been, and I doubt there was really any. I bet he's repaid that 100-fold over the years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's just like a little informal thing. So managers can get a little more creative as well.
So hearing you talk sparked two more questions for me. So,
okay.
Here's my next one. So you said you did your first draft and had it March 2020, and then the world flipped upside down, and you said, okay, time to do new interviews. All right.
Yeah. So
when you look at those two, I'm curious what you saw as in the same things, even though the context changed, but people were still trying to do the same things, or things that just popped up that were very different. I'd just be curious how you contrasted those.
Yeah. So the focus of my book proposal, and as I think I wasn't really that far into the book in March, but it was going to be very focused on working parents as opposed to this broader approach. And some of the advice was going to be like, hey, let people work from home one or 2 days a week, right? Which
apparently the world heard you, Scott. The world heard you loud and clear. They said, this is a great idea. How about for 18 months?
And so while it did take some rework, I think it's rare you could write a book that kind of documents a major thing happening in the world of work while it's happening. So while the book is not all about how companies reacted to the pandemic and how they are planning on, figuring out a new way to do things post-pandemic, quote unquote, hopefully, but that's in there. And then there's the evergreen parts of it as well. I do feel like it was a bit of a privilege to be able to kind of document these things as they're happening. So like, for example, one executive at Bristol Myers, they were in this frantic meeting in March or February, actually. And they were like, what are we going to do if all these people have to work from home? And somebody's like, can we buy 40,000 laptops? I'm like, yeah, I guess we could buy 40,000 laptops, right? And like, so it was just like, everything was on the table. Like, and I think that's, the bright, the dark cloud with the silver lining, right? To the dark cloud, the horrible dark cloud of the last 18 months. The silver lining is workplaces can really rethink how we do things, and everything was kind of on the table. Companies that would never have allowed remote work were forced into it. And in most cases, it worked okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and so it would be a shame to go back to the way things were without applying any of the lessons that we've learned from these last 18 months.
Okay, so great segue to my next question.
Okay.
So naturally, everyone's starting to think about post-pandemic, although that timeline keeps shifting for all of us.
Yeah.
And every company I talk to has got a different plan. They've got different date they're going to come back, different approach they're going to use. I mean, no one's doing the same thing. I haven't seen the same thing twice, like fingerprints.
Yep.
So, what would you recommend? What's the approach that you think? And I'm not going to hold you on the spot. I know we're all trying to look into the crazy crystal ball, and the picture keeps changing. It's more like a snow globe. But what would you recommend?
Well, a couple of things. One, you're never going to please everybody with your decisions, right? We're seeing this with vaccine mandates or mask mandates, right? Like some people are going to be upset if you do and if you don't. And, if you're going to return people to the workplace, some people are going to love that. They wanted to get back to work, and other people would love to work from home forever, right? So I think that you should start with a set of principles, right? Like this is what we value as we're going to try to return to some sort of normalcy, non-emergency room approach to remote work. Yeah. And so if we start with like, really, what are our deep values about, what are we really here for, or what do we really want to support? Then the decisions flow from that, right? And it depends on what your workers want. It depends on how people have worked well over the last 18 months, or have they not? It depends on, who you serve. Healthcare organizations have different set of challenges than Facebook, where people can work easier remotely, right? And then, of course, there's all the employees who have worked physically and in person throughout this whole time, and making sure that we're still valuing their physical and mental well-being as well. So it is super complicated. But I will say this: you should lead with kind of what your values are, because at least then, like, if some people are not happy with it, you can sleep well at night knowing that you're guided by trying to take care of as many people as possible. And then secondly, I think, every organization that is at all smart is going to retain some elements of flexibility going forward, whether it's just as needed or, ad hoc kind of approaches, or, whether it's full hybrid or whatever else. Because there's going to be more disruption. So it gets to like a risk management approach and a continuity management approach as well, right? How do you retain business continuity when you don't know what the next year is what's going to unfold, right? We need to maintain some agility and flexibility. And so that was a long answer to to a question that was a little more focused, but I think starting with principles and retaining at least some elements of flexibility that gives you the resilience in the face of future changes.
I love that answer. Fantastic, beautiful. Did spark another question for me.
Yeah. All right.
There's a natural tension between consistency and flexibility.
Yes.
So while I know some employers are saying we're going to let the managers decide who working from home, some teams can and can't. But then I've also seen, like, for example, I know of a quick service restaurant chain who, of course, all the headquarters folks, staff members, all got to work from home. But the folks on the front lines did not get that privilege. Sure. And about 9 months in, they said, hey, it's kind of not fair. You all get to work from home. And we're out here wearing masks in dealing with the pandemic and feeding people. And there was tension because they felt like this group got special treatment that they would never be afforded. So how do we navigate that? Or is it possible to navigate that? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because you could really look at that both ways, right? Because you're protecting as many people as you could protect by having as many people work from home as possible. Where people's jobs don't allow it, you can protect their safety as best you can, but you can't have them remotely work, right? So I understand that from both points of view. I think Tim Hall, who was an early work-life researcher and kind of a role model, he quoted saying, we need less rigid forms of flexibility. And I think that's just a really good way to kind of approach things, that 100% work from home is probably not the best for most situations. 100%, working in office is probably not best for all situations. And I guess the other thing I would say is, if we are valuing both of these sets of employees, right? The ones that were like tethered to time and place, and the others that were untethered from time and place, but we value both of them, what we do for them could be different as long as we are supporting them in meaningful ways. So did the quick service workers who were on the front lines, were they getting increased pay? Were they getting, very safe work environments? Were they given more paid time off to reduce burnout and the feelings of anxiety that they were having? Were they getting schedule certainty? Were we making sure that customers weren't putting them at risk and stepping up for them? Right? Those are ways in which, are we providing them like livable wages and good benefits? I mean, lots of hourly, Shake Shack and Costco and all these other places that have hourly employees, pay them well, provide them full-time benefits. We could do that for almost all of our, frontline food service workers. So maybe we can't have them work from home, right? But we could support them in many different ways. And sometimes we forget to be creative when it comes to that segment of the workforce, which is a real shame, I think, because, you think about, for me and probably you, we were protected during the pandemic. We worked from home. We weren't necessarily at risk. And lots of people who got paid a lot less than we do, probably, were risking getting sick and bringing it home and having all that anxiety. So it's, we really need to make sure that we value all of these employees, even if we can't provide the same exact supports for each type of employee.
So what I love you did there was you basically took our conversation full circle, because you went back to our first part of the conversation where we talked about different seasons.
Yes.
And then we can almost reframe this as different contexts, right? Yeah. So don't just look at seasons of people's life, but also contexts in which they work. And while we might not be able to give everybody the same benefits, what are benefits that are particularly good for their particular context?
Yes.
That show them that we care, we've got compassion for them, and we're considerate of them.
Yes.
So I love that. Well, okay, Scott, this has been great. So I ask all my guests this kind of closing question. So what is one life hack you might have for us that can help us to either have better conversations or healthier relationships, either at work or at home?
Okay, so I'm going to credit my wife for this, because she, I used to be much more of a control freak than I am now. Okay, and I
love when you said that you were doing this with your hands.
Yes,
your hands were like.
She once said, and I don't know, I was micromanaging her on something, and she's like, "You can ask me to do something, or you can tell me how to do it, but you can't do both." So it's really been helpful, so that when like she's taking care of something in the house, or I'm taking care of something in the house, or we're parenting, we're not micromanaging each other. And if she does things a little bit differently, and, I hate how she puts dishes in the dishwasher, that's, she's putting the dishes in the dishwasher. I can't tell her how to do it. And I think, she, to her credit, one thing a lot of couples struggle with is what's called gatekeeping with parenting, where in many cases the mother like takes the primary role of parent and the dad is just kind of the tentative helper. She fully empowered me when it was my times and my days to deal with my son when he was very little. She didn't question it. She was like, yeah, Scott's got it. I mean, he's not an idiot. Scott, our son will be fine. So anyway, getting back to that, it's, you can ask somebody to do something, you can tell them how to do it, but you can't do both.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's beautiful. You were mentioning the dishwasher, and I heard a lot of chatter in the production studio, because apparently I'm well known for how fantastic I am at reorganizing the dishwasher.
Yes, I am very, it's the total
There's a certain
Jenga
way it needs to be done. The heavy things on the bottom, the lighter things on top.
Yep.
What my family does is they cram all of the forks and knives in the first two holders, and then there's 5 holders that are empty. Drives me
Yeah,
nuts.
it's the efficiency level when I don't do it is not what it should be. But again,
Yep.
it's okay. I have clean dishes.
I'll say this: last time I traveled, my daughter sent me a picture. It's either my daughter or one of my sons, and she sent me a picture of the dishwasher not organized. She said, "This is what happens when you're not here."
Yeah, that's probably the same here.
Yeah. Scott, this was really, really great. I really enjoyed our conversation. I love all your insights. I mean, I highly recommend that people get the Whole Person Workplace book because this is really what this is all about. If people want to learn more about you, if they want to follow you, get copies of your mini books, where can they go?
Well, you can get the books wherever you buy books. And for most people, that's probably Amazon. That's probably the easiest thing to do. But I would recommend IndieBound, which is the online bookseller that's a collective of independent bookstores around the country. If you want to find out more about me and my work and my other writing and my other books and the other stuff I do, workshops and speaking and things like that, you could go to scottbehson.com, SCOTTBEHSON.com. And pretty much all the information you might need is there. Reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Scott, this was great. You're an absolute gift. I really appreciate our conversation. I look forward to the next time our paths get to cross.
Great. Thank you so much. This is great.
My pleasure. All right, folks, I know you enjoyed that conversation. I definitely did. As usual, got a whole page of notes here. And what I loved about what Scott talked about was he really, first of all, set us up. What does it mean to have a whole person workplace? And I love this idea, first of all, talking about seasons. We're in different seasons of life, whether we've got young employees that just graduate, or we've got mid-level employees in mid-career. We've got folks maybe at the other end of their career, and what can we be doing to support them? But we also talked about there could be different contexts. We've got folks who are frontline workers. We've got folks who are corporate. They may have different needs too. So just that idea of recognizing different needs. And then I loved his example of BASF almost on their site having like a periodic table of benefits that kind of can plug in to meet different needs at different employee life stages or situations. I love that idea. But then he also gave the example. He said, look, you don't have to be a big organization to do stuff. It doesn't have to be expensive. You can be a small one. He tells the other story of the 12-person store and how they decided that they wanted to figure out ways to support and care for their employees. And one of the things they do is they're very considerate, and they allow employees to know their schedule 3 weeks out. So there's little things you can do, like just giving employees more heads up, that consideration. And then that turned into employees wanting to change their tip jar into donations to the local community food bank. I think that was a great example and metaphor that if we do this right, our employees will treat our customers or constituents or communities that we serve really, really well. I thought he also did a good job talking about what us as managers can do. And he said we've just got to be spending time being a little more active listening and caring. He talked about flex jobs and how they have that 15-minute conversation every week to talk about how are things going. And then be flexible, creative and flexible in how we kind of care for employees. And then we kind of ended by saying, post-pandemic, what's the world need to look like? And he said, we've got to really, really be aware of flexibility, be prepared for other situations that might come along. But he said the key is, no matter what decision you make about coming back into work, start with your principles. Figure out what your principles are. What are the things you really value as an organization? And make decisions anchored off of that. And he said at the end, if you do that, you'll sleep well at night. And then when I asked him for, of course, at the very end, his life hack, I love the story he gave of his wife sharing, you can either tell me to do something or you can ask me to do something, but you can't do both. I'm going to remember that. So I hope you really enjoyed our conversation. I encourage you to get a copy of Dr. Scott Behson's book, The Whole Person Workplace. And until our next show, have a great week and an awesome life.